imagine walking down the aisle, just completely weeping in raw, visceral terror.
Oh my God.
Like, not tears of joy, not the overwhelmed emotion of a milestone, but the terrifying, suffocating realization that the flawless, floral-scented fantasy you are stepping into is actually a meticulously decorated cage.
A $50,000 cage.
Exactly. Today, we are dissecting the anatomy of delusion. We are breaking down the exact mechanisms of what happens when the aesthetic performance of a perfect life violently collides with the inescapable consequences of reality. So welcome back to the Snark side, everyone.
Welcome back.
I just want everyone to take a beat with me right now. Just breathe. Look right into the metaphorical mic with me. Babes, wherever you are, whenever you're listening, we fucking love you.
We really, truly do.
I just want to let that silence hang for a second so it really lands. Because, babes, we have had a deeply chaotic but incredible Sunday. And honestly, we loved every single second of it.
I mean, it was a beautiful disaster. Truly the kind of Sunday that requires immediate medicinal wine consumption afterward, just to process the sheer volume of flower and chaos that occurred.
Let me set the weekend scene for you all, because, we had to meet up with our OG Snark queens, Jonah, Felicia. We met up at the retirement home, which is already an elite vibe. And, babes, we went to a pizza-making class.
Calling it a class is a profound overstatement. It was an active combat zone masquerading as a culinary experience.
It was an unmitigated disaster of dough. We walked in with this supreme delusion that we're going to craft these perfectly round, artisanal, Instagram-ready pizzas.
Completely delulu.
Right, like we were visualizing the perfect strategic placement of fresh basil leaves. But the delusion of an aesthetic life rarely survives contact with reality.
No, because within 4 minutes, the structural integrity of the dough collapsed. There was flour in the ventilation grates, flour in my eyelashes. Joan's immaculate black sweater looked like she had just survived a blizzard.
I am literally laughing just thinking about it. But what was truly fascinating was the psychological response to the chaos. Because Joan and Felicia were absolutely thriving in the mess. They were entirely unfazed by the collapse of the aesthetic.
Which is a sign of true mental stability.
It is. We had these core lived-in bestie moments where we were laughing so aggressively that someone choked on a piece of pepperoni.
That was me. I thought I was going to pass out.
We were harshly judging each other's wildly disproportionate toppings. It was messy, it was loud, and it was entirely genuine.
Which is, ironically, the exact opposite of the performative perfection we're about to unpack in this recap. Our messy pizza was authentic. The pristine wedding we watched this week, a psychological horror show.
Honestly, the flower bomb was the perfect prelude to recording tonight. It was like an appetizer to our wine. Speaking of which.
Cheers to that. Let's take a sip.
Cheers. Much needed. Okay, before we descend into the HBO madness, let's pivot to some work week prep. Because yes, babes, dentist life is calling. Adult responsibilities never sleep, no matter how much reality TV we consume. So let's do our weekly roses and thorns.
Let's ground ourselves in the mundane reality of our own lives before we completely lose our minds over the systemic trauma we witnessed on screen. You go first.
I'll initiate my thorn. I am experiencing a profound, soul-crushing dread regarding a massive staff meeting on Tuesday.
Oh, the Tuesday staff meetings are lethal.
I am already spiraling. It's one of those mandatory gatherings that could have easily been resolved with a 3-sentence email. Instead, it's going to be 2 continuous hours of sitting under aggressive fluorescent lights performing the act of active listening while my internal light slowly extinguishes. I am feeling so much anticipatory exhaustion.
It's the fluorescent lights that truly act as an instrument of psychological warfare.
Yeah.
They are specifically calibrated to extract joy and highlight every physical flaw you possess.
Literally. Okay, what is your thorn?
My thorn is similar in its banality. I have to finally confront my taxes.
Oh, no.
Yeah. The adult responsibilities have accumulated to the point where continued avoidance transitions from lazy to legally dangerous. So, I will be spending my evenings weeping over Excel spreadsheets, confronting the stark reality of my own financial decisions.
The ultimate reality check. Okay, but what is your rose? Pull us out of the despair.
My rose is highly specific. I finally locked in my precise coffee order strategy for the week, and I have meticulously pre-budgeted for the artisanal, overpriced lattes that I require to survive the aforementioned tax confrontation.
Yes, self-care.
Exactly. It's a localized inflation of my own making, but a necessary survival tactic. What's your rose?
My rose is that I am getting my eyebrows laminated on Thursday.
Oh, stunning.
And I genuinely believe this procedure is going to correct the trajectory of my entire life. Like, once the brows are structurally secured, I feel like the emotional stability of my week naturally follows. It's structural engineering for the face.
I do not disagree at all. Brows function as the architectural anchor of the face. If the foundation is strong, the building stands.
Exactly. Okay, let's abruptly shift the mood. Let's execute the nuptial pivot. Because, babes, we generally love a wedding episode. We live for the fashion, the drama, the inevitable drunken toasts. But this specific situation, goodness.
Calling it a wedding feels legally inaccurate. It was a hostage negotiation heavily draped in pastel floral arrangements.
I need to pose a hypothetical to you, and I am asking you listening right now to insert yourself into this scenario too. What is the singular catastrophic event that could occur at your wedding that would make you immediately nope out?
The absolute point of no return.
Yes, the kind of event where you just pivot on your heels, drop the bouquet, and silently walk into the ocean.
Yeah, what is yours?
For me, it has to be a massive, meticulously planned public humiliation. Imagine the officiant says, "Speak now or forever hold your peace," and an X stands up in the third row.
Classic.
But they don't just eject. They pull down a projector screen, boot up a PowerPoint presentation filled with dated receipts, text screenshots, and audio recordings.
A literal presentation.
Yes, I would simply evaporate. My physical form would cease to exist from the sheer crushing weight of the embarrassment. I would become vapor.
The PowerPoint presentation is a devastating touch. It implies so much premeditation. But let me escalate the anxiety to a purely logistical nightmare.
Go ahead.
For me, the deal breaker is a systemic failure of infrastructure that leads to visceral danger. Imagine the catering company miscalculates and the alcohol runs dry before the salad course is even cleared.
A dry wedding is already a crime.
Right. So the guests become restless, mutinous even. Simultaneously, a structural beam in the reception tent snaps and a massive crystal chandelier plummets, physically maiming someone at the altar. I am immediately out. I am calling an Uber Black, I am voiding the catering contract from the back seat, and I am initiating a witness protection protocol for myself.
You would leave your new spouse trapped under a crystal chandelier while you secure transportation.
Survival of the fittest is not paused for matrimonial vows. A dry wedding with active casualties is the boundary I refuse to cross.
That is deeply unhinged, but honestly, after analyzing what we just watched on HBO, a falling chandelier feels profoundly tame. We are fully emotionally charged tonight, babes. We are slightly tipsy, and we are ready to methodically tear into the chaos of this episode.
We are dissecting Season 3, Episode 3, The Best Day of My Life. Or, as the streets are calling it, The Ballad of Paladin.
Let's abandon chronological order entirely, because walking through this plot point by point doesn't do justice to the thematic weight. We need to connect these threads by their underlying psychological tires.
The overarching theme of this entire episode is the delusion of control. Everyone thinks they are outsmarting a system that is actively consuming them.
Yes. Let's start with the most suffocating delusion of all. The economics of exploitation surrounding Jules. We get this flashback to her origin story as a sugar baby. We were back in art school. She's living in this massive, implausible loft. And her roommate Vivian casually suggests she get into sugar babying because, quote, it beats retail.
That single line, "it beats retail," is the thesis statement for the commodification of the human body in modern capitalism.
It really is.
Vivian presents it as a pragmatic, cynical life hack. She frames it as though Jules would simply be bypassing the inefficiency of minimum wage labor. But Vivian fundamentally misunderstands the transaction. In retail, you sell your time. In this underground economy, you sell your autonomy.
And Jules internalizes the math so quickly. We witness her first date with Rick. He is this 48-year-old lawyer who openly admits his therapist diagnosed him with severe intimacy issues.
Always the lawyers.
Right. And his specific requirement is licking her nylons while he pleasures himself. I was watching this scene, physically recoiling, but my brain was also running the numbers right alongside Jules. She realizes she only has to endure this highly specific degradation twice a month to secure $750, entirely covering her rent.
It's the ultimate monetization of the male gaze and male dysfunction. She is treating herself like a luxury asset. She builds an entire diversified portfolio of clients. The Hollywood producer worth $200 million. The standard issue finance bro she services under a mahogany desk while he conducts a conference call.
The conference call part made me sick.
But the entire narrative gravity shifts when she secures the client who alters her trajectory. Ellis.
Enter Sam Trammell playing Ellis, the plastic surgeon. The moment he appeared on screen, my nervous system spiked. The energy wasn't just creepy. It was entirely clinical.
What is deeply unsettling about Ellis is how he embodies a terrifying medical god complex. He doesn't merely want a transactional sexual relationship with Jules. He wants to study her as a biological anomaly. Oh my God, that conversation.
They share this quiet, tense conversation where Jules discloses that she transitioned at 14. Ellis gently strokes her skin and observes, "That's why you're poreless. You never went through puberty. It's beautiful." It strips away her humanity and reduces her to a flawless specimen.
It evoked a visceral panic in me. And then he elevates the arrogance. He compares his lucrative career as a plastic surgeon to the profound personal journey of her transition, declaring, "I do what God couldn't."
The absolute hubris.
Right. Later, when Jules attempts to apologize for asking a basic conversational question about his family, assuming she made him uncomfortable, he deadpans, "I slice women open for a living." There's very little that makes me uncomfortable.
It is dialogue ripped straight from a psychological thriller, delivered in the hushed tones of a luxury penthouse. It establishes his complete detachment from human empathy, which brings us to the scene that serves as the visual metaphor for Jules' entire arc this season.
I can barely talk about it. He positions Jules standing in her underwear, arms raised above her head in this incredibly vulnerable, stressful posture, and he meticulously begins to wrap her physical body in cellophane.
Saran wrap. He tightly binds her in industrial plastic wrap.
He leaves only a minuscule opening over her mouth for oxygen. He steps back, evaluating her like a newly acquired art installation, and whispers, "I just might keep you forever," before kissing her through the suffocating layer of plastic.
But hold on, I need to push back on the interpretation of this scene for a second. Is Jules entirely a victim here? We have to look at the agency she thinks she possesses.
I mean, does she have any?
Well, Rue's narration explicitly tells us that becoming a sugar baby eradicated all of Jules' anxieties about failing as an artist. She actively drops out of art school because the income stream is so massive. Is Jules consciously reclaiming her body by commodifying it on her own terms? Is she viewing the plastic wrap as performance art that she's heavily compensated for rather than a trap?
I understand the desire to assign her agency, but we have to look at the mechanics of the trap. She thinks she's exploiting the patriarchy, but she's literally immobilized by it. Let's use a specific analogy here. She is treating herself like a vintage Ferrari. She thinks she's the one securing the bag, but Ellis isn't loving her. He is shrink-wrapping the Ferrari and storing it in a climate-controlled garage to preserve his own localized inflation.
Oh, wow, the Ferrari analogy is so dark.
He is halting her decay, stopping her movement, and possessing her. She thinks she's replacing the destructive trauma of Cal with a safer, more lucrative arrangement, but she's just stepped into a tighter cage.
And the cinematic brilliance of that scene perfectly captures that dissonance. The music playing over the cellophane wrapping isn't the usual moody, trippy soundtrack. It's this sweeping, triumphant, orchestral Hans Zimmer score. It sounds like a protagonist finally winning a war.
Exactly. The audiovisual storytelling is paramount here. The music represents Jules' internal delusion. She feels victorious, financially secure, and desired. But the visual, a young woman suffocating inside layers of plastic, is the objective, undeniable reality of her exploitation.
That exact same delusion, the arrogant belief that you can outsmart a system specifically designed to consume you, is precisely what Rue is experiencing over at the Silver Slipper. Let's pivot to the geographical rationalizations happening in the cartel underworld.
Rue has been officially promoted. She is now operating as a designated arms dealer for Alamo.
And before we dive into the mechanics of this, we need to enforce a mandatory neutrality pause. When discussing Rue's selling AR-15s and meticulously shaving off serial numbers, we are impartially reporting Rue's exact dialogue from the show.
Right, just stating the facts of the scene.
Exactly. She provides this breezy voiceover stating, "I know a lot of Americans have very strong feelings about guns, but if it's any consolation, the majority of the weapons I was selling were headed to Mexico." We're analyzing this strictly through the lens of the show's narrative architecture, without endorsing or condemning the political viewpoints presented.
Correct. We are examining the psychological compartmentalization Rue uses to survive her reality. Rue informs Alamo that her ultimate objective is to accumulate enough capital to go legit. This is an astonishing display of cognitive dissonance.
It is staggering.
Alamo interprets her desire to go legit as a philosophical insult. He launches into this dense macroeconomic monologue about the life cycle of illicit markets. He argues that all underground economies, whether it's running numbers in the 20s or bootlegging during Prohibition, eventually transition into state-sanctioned monopolies.
He sounds like a professor.
He does. He states, What was once illegal is now legit. The question is, where does all that money go? He points out that the government claims the revenue funds education, yet the populace remains uneducated, highlighting the inherent corruption of the legit world Rue aspires to join.
It's a fascinating, highly academic, sociological debate happening in the back room of a strip club, but it is violently, abruptly shattered by the pig.
The visual execution of this scene is a textbook example of Tarantino-esque filmmaking.
For anyone unfamiliar with that specific cinematic term, can you explain exactly what Tarantino-esque means in this context?
Certainly, it refers to the deliberate juxtaposition of highly mundane, often philosophical or pop culture-heavy dialogue, layered directly over sudden, hyper-violent gore. The director lulls the audience into an intellectual rhythm only to shatter it with visceral brutality. It forces cognitive dissonance upon the viewer. You are pondering the macroeconomics of state-run lotteries one second and the next.
The pig that Alamo sent to Laurie's house as a threat last week wanders into the club. It just trots in, completely out of context, and begins urinating on the floor.
The disrespect.
Alamo, triggered into an explosive rage by the sheer disrespect of the animal being returned, draws his weapon and executes the pig point blank. The physical reality of the gore, blood, and viscera splattering directly onto a dancer named Magic snaps us out of the philosophical debate.
It violently reminds Rue and the audience that Alamo is not an adjunct professor of economics. He is a ruthless cartel boss operating in a world where violence is the primary currency. And his reaction to the pig initiates a targeted, absurd retaliation protocol against Laurie. He decides to inflict emotional devastation by targeting her most cherished possession.
Her pet parrot, Paladin.
Yeah.
We've previously witnessed Laurie cooing over this bird, tenderly referring to it as her perfect little baby guy, and Alamo deliberately puts a hit out on a tropical bird. The stakes of this cartel war are becoming bizarrely specific, yet the danger remains lethal.
It highlights the absurdity of power struggles. So we have Jules shrink-wrapped as an aesthetic object, and Rue compartmentalizing her role in an international arms ring while caught in a crossfire over livestock. This is the baseline accepted reality before we even address the epicenter of delusion in this episode, Cassie and Nate's wedding.
The architecture of delusion. Let's examine the nuptial nightmares. We have to dissect the aesthetics, the fashion as psychological warfare, and the sunk cost fallacy of this entire event.
Let's begin with the budget, which functions as a manifestation of Cassie's desperation. She clearly exhausted her entire $50,000 OnlyFans revenue stream on floral arrangements, massive pink and orange archways, and overbearing floral formation of their initials.
And the crowning centerpiece, the custom C and N ice sculpture. But the ambient heat is causing Cassie's carefully carved icy breasts to melt and drip consistently throughout the reception. It is poetry in motion, the literal melting of her flawless facade.
The fashion alone requires an anthropological deep dive. The wardrobe department specifically utilized clothing to signal the underlying hostilities among the guest list.
The guest attire was openly hostile. Put yourself in Maddie's shoes for a second. You see your deeply abusive ex-boyfriend marrying your former best friend. What do?
You show up to ruin lives.
Exactly. Maddie arrives in a custom, vibrant green gown featuring a dangerously low open back, draped in a matching fur stole, and accessorized with a rosary dangling aggressively past her hips.
The rosary is sending me.
The cultural semiotics of wearing a rosary to a wedding you despise. It communicates revenge, it communicates high drama, it screams, I refuse to be a passive observer in this tragedy.
Rue's voiceover explicitly notes that Maddie was undecided on whether she intended to actively sabotage the union or simply secure a financial payout. But the fashion choices of the entire ensemble are weaponized. Rue actually compensates Jules to attend as her sugar daddy +1, forcefully shoving cash into her bra and issuing the directive to dress sexy.
And Jules, fully embodying the shrink-wrapped Ferrari persona, arrives in a sheer icy blue gathered dress from Acne Studios. It provides less coverage than a standard swimsuit. She pairs it with a stark blonde wig that legitimately offers more modesty than the garment itself.
It was barely a suggestion of a dress.
The sheer audacity prompts Nate's mother, Marcia, to sneer, I can't believe she had the nerve to show her face, to which Cal effortlessly counters, she showed a little more than her face. The weaponized shade.
Contrast that aggressive glamour with Lexi, who is relegated to wearing a deeply unflattering, overly conservative pink nanodiscipline bridesmaid dress. The stark visual difference between Lexi's forced, frumpy compliance and the aggressive, disruptive sexuality of Jules and Maddie perfectly illustrates the fractured dynamics of this friend group. Oh, and BB arrives heavily pregnant in a midriff-bearing ensemble, functioning as a walking powder keg of unpredictability.
While the guests are utilizing fashion as combat outside, Nate is experiencing a total systemic breakdown in the venue's bathroom. He is physically hiding, vomiting into a paper bag, frantically declining incoming calls from Nas, his Russian loan shark.
Love to see it.
And I will not feign empathy here. Watching Nate hyperventilate and suffer under the weight of his own arrogance provided a deep, visceral satisfaction.
It offers a fleeting moment of catharsis, certainly, but it also brutally exposes the profound toxicity of Cassie's delusion. She is fully aware he did not return home the previous night. She can sense the ambient panic radiating from him. Yet she actively chooses to ignore a blinding array of red flags because acknowledging the reality would shatter the aesthetic perfection of the day. She requires the performance of the wedding to validate her inherent worth.
And if you were seeking comforting validation before walking down the aisle, the absolute last person you would want by your side is Suze. Cassie's mother delivers a pep talk that functions as pure, unfiltered psychological horror.
It operates entirely on the frequency of the movie Black Swan.
Yes. Explain the Black Swan parallel here because it is so accurate.
Black Swan explores the destructive pressure of perfection and the maternal passing down of unfulfilled ambition and generational trauma. Suze isn't comforting her daughter. She is projecting her own profound regrets onto Cassie in the most vulnerable moment of her life.
It is terrifying. Suze leans in, whispering urgently as they prepare to walk the aisle, making the entire emotional beat about her own historical trauma. She confesses that the fleeting moment before she married Cassie's father was the last happy moment they ever shared.
Just devastating.
She details her own naive optimism, followed immediately by the soul-crushing discovery of the brutality of the man once the contract was signed. She looks her daughter in the eye and states, "It's not a mistake you can fix."
It is a horrific burden to place on a bride.
And the physical acting here is phenomenal. Cassie is walking down the aisle, her eyes welling with tears, weeping in raw, visceral fear. She looks like she's marching to an execution. But the moment they reach the altar, exchange vows, and aggressively kiss for the audience, the switch flips. Suddenly, they are beaming. The performance takes over.
It is the intoxicating high of compliance. For that singular minute walking back up the aisle, they successfully executed the roles of the flawless bride and the providing groom. But as the narrative structure demands, that fleeting high is immediately punished. The reception of horrors commences.
The first dance. I am still emotionally recovering from this choreography. It was aggressively cheesy, highly rehearsed, and entirely devoid of genuine chemistry. Nate literally dropped to his knees and plays air guitar on Cassie's backside. It was an assault on my corneas.
I had to avert my eyes. The secondhand embarrassment was a physical weight on my chest. The first dance encapsulates their entire dynamic. Highly performative, deeply uncomfortable for any witnesses, and completely lacking in authentic intimacy. It is a desperate attempt to manufacture passion through choreography, and the tension only escalates during the toasts. Marcia stands up with a microphone and delivers a speech that throws laser-focused, undeniable shade directly at Maddie, lamenting the tragedy of boys bringing home the wrong girl. You watch Maddie's face harden as the insult lands.
Amidst this escalating public hostility, we get an isolated moment of attempted closure at the bar between Jules and Cal, and this interaction requires intense scrutiny.
Cal approaches Jules and utilizes his signature manipulation tactic, the weaponization of honesty.
Yes, the weaponized honesty.
He reveals the truth about his arrest at the end of Season 2. He clarifies that he wasn't incarcerated for filming Jules. He was arrested for possessing a tape of a young man who was merely 2.5 months shy of his 18th birthday. Cal looks at Jules and attempts to draw a false equivalence, stating, "He lied about his age, just like you."
And then he launches into this monologue, claiming he took a plea deal and was placed on the sex offender registry, which he dramatically refers to as a modern-day scarlet letter.
The audacity to invoke Nathaniel Hawthorne to defend statutory offenses. The scarlet letter was meant to symbolize the hypocritical shaming of natural human desire by a puritanical society. Cal, twisting that literary metaphor to frame himself as a victim of an overly rigid legal system, is a masterclass in narcissistic deflection. He openly laments that society views him as a pedo.
He is complaining about being labeled a predator while standing inches away from the teenager he secretly filmed without consent. But here's where I have to pause and analyze the narrative purpose of this scene. Cal issues a hollow apology, claiming he only taped her because he wanted to jerk off to it later, which is a confession of objectification, not an apology. But Jules logically connects the dots. If the authorities never possessed her tape, Nate must have destroyed it. I'm not sure how to feel about this. Is the show attempting to redeem Cal and Nate here? Are we supposed to view Nate as a silent protector?
I don't see it as redemption. I see it as a study in toxic charm and the collateral benefits of a corrupt system. Nate didn't destroy the tape out of a pure altruistic desire to protect Jules. He destroyed it to protect his family's legacy and his own leverage. Cal is simply claiming the credit for a crisis averted. He lacks genuine shame, which mimics the appearance of radical honesty. It neatly resolves the lingering plot thread of the tape, but it shouldn't be mistaken for moral growth.
It forces Jules into a complicated emotional space regarding Nate, precisely when Nate's entire world is actively collapsing inside the reception tent, because the debt finally breaches the perimeter of the venue. Nas, the Russian loan shark, confidently strolls in and positions himself directly at the head table.
Nas serves as the physical manifestation of reality, piercing the aesthetic delusion. He casually highlights the grotesque absurdity of hosting a luxury event overflowing with champagne and lobster while drowning in illicit debt.
And the ripple effects of this confrontation bleed directly into the guest list, specifically targeting the ultimate victims of proximity to wealth: the neighbors, Fred and Heather.
Let's deeply analyze the psychological failure of Fred and Heather. These are the neighbors from the infamous dinner party who voluntarily invested their children's college funds into Nate's entirely fabricated Sun Settlers real estate venture.
What is the mechanism behind that level of gullibility? Who hands over their children's financial future to a volatile 20-something with no proven track record?
It is a textbook failure of neurological risk assessment caused by proximity to extreme wealth. When average individuals are granted access to the inner circle of the ultra-wealthy, the glare of the lifestyle blinds their critical thinking. They assume the wealth validates the intelligence. Heather overhears Naz quietly threatening Nate at the table, and her internal alarm finally sounds. She immediately confronts Cassie.
And Cassie's reaction is a terrifying display of cognitive dissonance. Lexi, trying to manage the escalating crisis, asks if everything is okay. Cassie, with her eyes rimmed red and brimming with unshed tears, forces a manic smile and replies, "Of course. It's my wedding day." What a weird question to ask on the best day of my life. She is white-knuckling her grip on the script.
She would rather burn inside the burning house than admit the house is on fire. Meanwhile, Fred confronts Nate directly, and Nate, despite operating in a state of sheer panic, executes a manipulative maneuver that relies entirely on the fragility of the male ego. He invents a lie out of thin air. He confidently tells Fred that the massive construction project was indefinitely halted because environmental surveyors discovered a highly endangered white fritillary flower on the site.
The irony of using a fragile, rare flower as the excuse to cover up a parasitic financial scam. And Fred completely accepts it.
He accepts it because the alternative, admitting he was conned out of his family's future by a kid, would destroy his ego. The sunk cost fallacy requires Fred to double down on the delusion. He even reassures Nate, saying he will handle his wife's anxiety. Nate identified the exact pressure point of Fred's pride and pressed it.
But Nate's manipulative genius completely fails on his new wife. The pressure cooker explodes. Cassie snaps. She begins screaming at Nate in front of the remaining guests, tearing down the facade.
It was so loud.
She yells that he expects her to fulfill the aesthetic role of the perfect housewife, to cook, to clean, to blindly please him, yet they lack the fundamental resources to survive. She weaponizes traditional gender roles against him, screaming, "You're not a man, men provide."
It is a brutal unmasking of their foundational contract. Cassie's entire framework for love is transactional. She submitted to his dominance and his chaos under the strict condition that he would provide the financial and aesthetic security of a luxury lifestyle. When he fails to provide, the contract is voided.
And she punctuates this voided contract by violently, accidentally popping a champagne cork directly into Nate's eye.
Right in the eye.
It is slapstick comedy nested deeply inside a psychological tragedy.
The cork pop is the physical snapping of the tension. But as this domestic warfare escalates, the cartel warfare is simultaneously reaching its climax.
Yes, Rue entirely misses the champagne blinding. She receives a directive from Bishop that Alamo requires her presence for a pickup at Laurie's compound. She departs the wedding early, but during the drive, she receives a phone call from a correctional facility. It's Fez.
The placement of this scene is narratively crucial. We only hear Rue's side of the conversation, which amplifies the isolation.
Fez is apparently making light of his incarceration, joking about utilizing parkour to scale the prison walls. It is an incredibly tender exchange. Rue is laughing, playing along, promising to act as his getaway driver when he parkours to freedom. It broke my heart because the warmth of that connection is so rare for her right now.
It is a beautiful moment, but it operates as heavy, tragic foreshadowing. Fez is physically caged in a state penitentiary, while Rue is actively driving herself deeper into the inescapable cage of a criminal syndicate. The parallel trajectories are stark.
Rue and Bishop arrive at Laurie's residence, and the ambient threat level is immediately severe. Wayne answers the door, wielding a shotgun before they even cross the threshold. They are ostensibly there to execute a routine transaction for pills, but Bishop harbors a covert objective.
The execution of Alamo's retaliation. The assassination of Paladin.
Bishop engages Laurie in a surprisingly nuanced conversation about classic Western television. He casually mentions that he recognizes the name Paladin from the vintage series Have Gun Will Travel. This specific cultural knowledge momentarily disarms Laurie, and in that brief window of distraction, Bishop smoothly deposits a lethal tablet of fentanyl directly into the parrot's water dish.
So cold.
The precision of it, and then they simply conclude the transaction and exit.
It is a surgical, devastating strike. Alamo promised to break her heart, and Bishop executed the mandate with chilling efficiency. It perfectly integrates the Western motif the director has woven throughout the season. Bishop operates like a silent, deadly gunslinger, utilizing poison instead of lead.
The poison has been planted. But we must return to the newlyweds, because the bloody aftermath of this reception is going to be permanently etched to my brain. Nate and Cassie depart the venue and arrive at their sprawling mansion in a vintage 2005 stretch Hummer limousine.
The Hummer limo.
I have to note, sitting in the back of a Hummer limo, wearing a full bridal veil while radiating pure fury, is an incredible visual aesthetic by Cassie.
Aesthetically compelling, logistically absurd. During the transit, Nate has deployed his classic manipulation playbook. He is whispering promises of reform, pledging to evolve into a superior husband and a dedicated father. He's aggressively trying to repair the aesthetic delusion, and it temporarily pacifies her. They carry her over the threshold directly into a nightmare.
The lights flick on, instantly illuminating Nas and his heavily armed enforcers waiting in the pristine living room. The violence is immediate. The goons tackle Nate to the floor and initiate a brutal, coordinated beating. Cassie is violently shoved aside, landing hard on the polished marble floor.
And this specific moment is where Cassie's psychological profile crosses a chilling threshold into narcissistic collapse.
She completely disconnects from the reality of the violence. She ignores her husband, who is actively fighting for his life, sustaining severe blunt force trauma mere feet away. She touches her own face, realizes the impact caused a minor nosebleed, and begins wailing. She doesn't turn around to assess Nate's condition. She simply stares at her own blood and screams, "This is so unfair. It was supposed to be the best day of my life."
Her empathy deficit is staggering, but it aligns perfectly with her pathology. Her entire identity is tethered to her physical perfection. The nosebleed represents the ultimate defilement of her aesthetic. Her husband's potential murder is secondary to the ruin of her fantasy. The narcissistic insulation is absolute.
And the reality of the violence escalates to a horrific peak. The enforcers pin Nate down. They forcibly remove his polished dress shoe. They produce a pair of heavy pliers.
Oh my God, the pliers.
And they methodically sever his pinky toe. The visceral spray of blood across the immaculate carpet. I was vocalizing my panic at the television.
The semiotics of severing the toe are vital here. It is not merely gratuitous gore. The toe provides physical balance. By amputating it, Nas is systematically dismantling Nate's foundational balance, both literally and figuratively. He is permanently destroying the alpha male physical dominance Nate relies upon to intimidate others. Nas then steps over the blood and delivers the devastating thesis statement of the entire episode directly to a weeping Cassie. Some women inherit wealth, but others inherit debt.
I felt chills radiate down my spine, the absolute finality of that statement. And the episode refuses to offer any comforting resolution, leaving us dangling on two massive parallel cliffhangers. Rue's driving through the night, listening to the spiritual cadence of Ali's Bible tapes, attempting to find a sliver of moral grounding when the interior of her car is flooded with flashing red and blue lights. She is pulled over by the DEA.
The inevitable collision between her geographical rationalizations and federal law enforcement. You cannot go legit while operating as a logistics node for a cartel.
And the final, haunting shot. We cut back to Larry's compound. Paladin the parrot hops down to his dish, takes a sip of the fentanyl-laced water, immediately loses consciousness, and drops dead.
The psychological warfare has officially escalated into a conflict with no possibility of de-escalation.
Before we transition into our segmented analysis, we need to take a macro view of the season's trajectory, because the discourse online is deeply fractured. Is the narrative becoming too relentlessly dark? Are we sacrificing the messy, relatable high school relationship drama for a bleak, Tarantino-style crime thriller? Where do you stand on this tonal shift?
I will definitively defend the shift. The narrative couldn't permanently reside in the neon-drenched hallways of a high school. These characters initiated a sequence of terrible adult choices in the previous seasons, and the architecture of the real world demands consequences. Debt accumulates, cartels retaliate, federal task forces investigate. It feels brutal because it is a necessary systemic reckoning. The show is maturing alongside the trauma of its characters.
I understand the logical necessity of consequences, but I have to push back on the execution. I miss the glitter. I miss the petty locker room betrayals. Currently, I feel like I'm watching a mashup of Django Unchained and The Sopranos. We are actively observing the amputation of appendages. The crime syndicate plotlines are emotionally exhausting. I want to analyze the nuances of toxic texting habits, not the logistics of DEA stings. The tonal whiplash is jarring, even though I remain thoroughly obsessed and seated for every broadcast.
The whiplash is intentional. The adult world does not accommodate their teenage angst. Let's unpack this further in our structured segments. Segment 1. Love or self-destruction. Are these characters driven by a genuine pursuit of human connection, or are they simply addicted to the adrenaline of chaos?
Let's focus on Cassie, because her behavior at the reception is the ultimate clinical case study for this question. Is her commitment to Nate rooted in a desire for partnership or a desperate need for aesthetic validation?
It is entirely the latter. Her concept of love is fundamentally flawed.
It is so deeply tragic. I react emotionally to Cassie because her need for male validation is a bottomless void. She equates a man's willingness to fund her lifestyle with his capacity to love her. She literally ignores the agonizing mutilation of her spouse because the aesthetic perfection of her event was compromised. She selected chaos the moment she betrayed Maddie to sleep with Nate, and she continues to choose it because she mistakes the intensity of his control for the passion of a grand romance.
She conflates compliance with virtue. And if we examine Jules, the psychological pattern repeats, albeit in a mutated form. Is Jules finding authentic empowerment through Ellis's immense wealth, or has she merely substituted the destructive trauma of Cal with a clinical predator who physically immobilizes her in plastic?
She has completely substituted the trauma. She operates under the delusion of power because her rent is covered and she escaped the grind of art school. But look at the visual reality. She is standing nude, tightly bound in saran wrap, relying on him to leave a hole so she can breathe. She's existing as an object in his inventory. She is addicted to the danger of being desired by older, powerful men. It is the definition of self-destruction masked as survival.
She has rationalized her exploitation as a strategic victory. She believes she is manipulating capitalism, but the patriarchy is actively consuming her. She traded her artistic voice for the illusion of financial security, which seamlessly transitions us into segment 2. Reality versus delusion. Who in this narrative possesses a clear vision of their circumstances and who is entirely lost within their own fabricated reality?
I firmly believe we must crown Maddie as the singular individual operating with perfect vision in this current landscape.
The evidence heavily supports that conclusion. Maddie endures the psychological torture of the ceremony, observes the deeply uncomfortable air guitar choreography of the first dance, reads the hostile energy of the room, and executes an immediate tactical retreat. She secures an Uber and departs the perimeter before the physical violence even ignites. She possesses the clarity to recognize a sinking ship. Rejection truly acted as her ultimate protection.
Contrast Maddie's sharp clarity with the sheer, blinding delusion of Fred. Fred is a grown man, presumably an educated professional, who voluntarily liquidated his children's college fund to invest in a fake real estate scheme orchestrated by a college-age sociopath. And when he's directly confronted with the undeniable reality of a Russian enforcer threatening his business partner at a wedding, Fred chooses to believe a fabricated story about an endangered white fritillary flower.
The white fritillary flower, it's too much.
He actively embraces delusion because acknowledging the reality that he bankrupted his family through sheer hubris would cause a total collapse of his ego.
And then we must address Rue's astonishing delusion. Rue is positioned in the back room of a strip club, actively facilitating the sale of military-grade weaponry for a cartel boss, witnessing the point-blank execution of livestock, and she genuinely, earnestly informs Alamo that her strategy is to go legit. The belief that you can simply tender your resignation to a cartel and transition into a standard corporate environment is a monumental disconnect from reality.
She's entirely lost in her own narrative. Okay, segment 3. If we were in this world, it is time to insert ourselves into the HBO chaos. How would we navigate the extreme pressure cooker of these environments?
I have plotted my exact exit strategy for the Silver Slipper. The precise millisecond a wild pig breaches the entrance of the club and begins urinating on the floor, my beverage is abandoned, and I'm sprinting toward the nearest illuminated emergency exit. I would not wait to witness the escalation. I do not coexist with unpredictable livestock in poorly lit and closed spaces. I would vanish.
I would have actively trampled patrons to escape that room. Regarding the wedding, I would have spiraled into an irreversible panic attack and canceled the entire event before my makeup was finished. If I received intelligence that my groom had failed to return home the previous night and was currently sequestered in the venue bathroom hyperventilating into a paper bag, the contract is terminated. I am commandeering the $50,000 worth of floral arrangements, I am entering the stretch Hummer limousine unaccompanied, and I am directing the driver to the nearest fast food drive-thru. I could not and would not endure the public humiliation.
You wouldn't remain to pop a champagne cork into his eye.
Absolutely not. I would be weeping too aggressively to aim accurately. I would be curled in a fetal position adjacent to the melting ice sculpture, mourning the death of my aesthetic. I lack the constitution to survive 10 minutes in this universe. We would immediately become collateral damage in someone else's character arc. Which brings us to our concluding segment, segment 4. Snark Squad Dark Theories. Let's project some bold, highly analytical, slightly unhinged interpretations based on the evidence presented tonight.
I have formulated a theory, and I feel incredibly strongly about its validity. I believe Rue is going to flip. The episode concludes with the DEA initiating a traffic stop. We know she desperately wants to go legit. I theorize the federal agents will present her with an ultimatum, and Rue will agree to become a confidential informant. She is going to orchestrate a sting operation to simultaneously dismantle both Alamo's operation and Laurie's compound. She's going to become a federal rat. I have to aggressively disagree with that assessment. I don't believe Rue possesses the psychological fortitude nor the meticulous organizational skills required to operate as an informant. Operating as a double agent demands a level of disciplined deception that Rue fundamentally lacks. She is too erratic. If she attempts to play both factions, either Alamo or Laurie will detect the betrayal immediately. She is significantly more likely to accidentally perish in a crossfire than successfully execute a federal sting operation.
But she must survive the season. She possesses narrative plot armor. A federal deal is her only logical exit from the cartel warfare.
The logic of this universe rarely aligns with survival. My dark theory centers on the deeply unsettling dynamic between Jules and Ellis. During their interaction, Ellis casually drops the information that his wife is fully aware of his proclivities. I reject that premise. I hypothesize that his wife is either entirely oblivious to his actions or, in a significantly darker twist, she is fully complicit and actively participates in scouting and trapping these vulnerable women. I believe Jules is unknowingly stepping into a highly organized, sinister syndicate, and this is far more dangerous than a standard transactional relationship.
Oh my God, you are suggesting a psychological horror scenario. A coordinated trap wrapped in cellophane. That is deeply terrifying. You are actively degrading my emotional stability regarding Jules' safety.
It perfectly aligns with the horror aesthetic the director is meticulously cultivating this season.
I am genuinely going to experience night terrors featuring severed toes and industrial plastic wrap. We have unpacked a monumental volume of trauma tonight. We need to initiate the wrap-up before I require my own paper bag to regulate my breathing.
Let's collectively lower our heart rates and return to reality.
Yes. A massive thank you to the Snark Squad for spending your time with us, for pouring a glass of wine with us, and for enduring this absolute psychological roller coaster of an episode.
It is consistently an intense journey analyzing this show with you all. Please ensure you share this recap with a friend who is currently spiraling over the semiotics of Nate's amputated toe, and take a moment to rate and review the Snark side on your preferred platform. The engagement truly sustains the show.
It is vital to our survival. And honestly, what an arc we have experienced today. Like Babes, we initiated this Sunday surrounded by pizza dough, chaotic flower clouds, and wine, and we concluded the evening spiraling into deep sociological analysis regarding severed toes, fentanyl-laced birdwater, and the collapse of a $50,000 wedding. It is emotionally exhausting, but it is completely undeniably necessary. I wouldn't want to dissect this chaos with anyone else.
The feeling is mutual, and next week we will analyze the immediate fallout of the DEA intercepting Rue, so utilize this week to rest.
Prepare your nervous systems for the impact. Babes, stay emotional, stay chaotic, and we will see you on the Snark side.